It's time to talk about everybody's favorite subject, Week 17, the playoffs, the fantasy playoffs. When all the money is won, we should probably look a little bit at what our teams look like, what our player combinations look like, what our exposures look like, and our general strategy around those playoff weeks that are paying out all the money, the most important weeks of the entire season. That's what we're going to get into today. Look at some of the player combinations, the game stacks, all of that we have in week 17, 16, maybe 15 if you want to look at it. But let's go ahead and get into it. What is going on, guys? Thank you for dealing with the reschedule. Normally, this show is on Wednesday afternoons, evenings, 5 p.m.-ish. But living in the beautiful Midwest, had some tornadoes going around the area yesterday, and so today we're moving the show to today. We bunkered down in the basement for a few hours yesterday afternoon, yesterday evening, and that was interesting. So we had to move it to today, lunchtime show as opposed to a early evening show. But if you missed last week was the first episode of this DraftIQ show, right? And so if you're first tuning in, and you don't know what the hell DraftIQ is, it's a tool that we've built at Spike Week, but it's a greater premise for this show where we're really just trying to truly understand our player exposures and our portfolio as a whole. And this show every week leading up to the season will be a way for us to dive into, or you'll be seeing literally the teams that I drafted, the player combinations that I draft. You'll see everything about my teams, but using this tool that we have built that shows you kind of everything about your portfolio to help drive better decision making, right? You're going to watch me work through my portfolio and see some things that I then want to, maybe I want to keep doing it up until the season for the rest of the draft cycle, or there's things that I really would like to rectify, things that I haven't drafted enough of, or things that I've drafted too much of that I would like to get away from. So that's what we're going to talk about today, but it's going to be playoff focused. So if you have drafted any best ball teams at all over the course of this offseason or consumed any best ball content, I'm sure you have seen a lot of the conversation around how important week 17 and the playoffs in general are. And I don't really think that can be understated. I understand that there are different approaches to specifically how you want to draft your teams as it relates to the week 16, week 17, and all of that. But I think regardless of how you approach that, you do still want to know what's in your portfolio as it relates to week 17 as one example. So even if you're not like as crazy big of an advocate of even like, the correlations and stacks and everything, like say someone like I am, it's still really beneficial to know, looking at your portfolio, and you say, okay, I'm not like going crazy out of my way to target those playoff weeks because, XYZ, I believe something a little bit different. But knowing what's there in your teams is still really helpful. And you can do really little minor things to tweak what's going on with your portfolio and what those week 17 stacks and correlations and everything look like. Because you may be inadvertently getting things that you don't even really know. That's what happens to me all the time. Shout out to Tony. Just got here. Love the DraftIQ for DraftKings. It's awesome to see. Worth every penny. Definitely 2 shows today. 2 shows today. Lunch hour best ball. We are having some fun. Let me pull up my DraftIQ for anyone that is or isn't, I guess, a Spike Week premium member. You can just get to your DraftIQ under Draft Tools. If you would like to sign up, it is $24.98 per month, so $25 a month. Go to Spike Week /Go Premium, and you can, there's a link in the description to get access to this tool as well as the Draft Helper overlay. So you can customize all sorts of fun data that you want to see while you're drafting. You know, your exposure to players, playoff schedules, ADP of players, all sorts of different things. You can actually see combinations of players with the overlay, which is pretty fun, and some of the things we're going to get into today. But it's there's a lot jam packed into this tool that we built here. But here we are. Great question. Not doing a lunch hour 5K like Leone last night. Everyone disappointed to not see you running. If you haven't seen last night's ship chasing episode, myself and Mike Leone joined the ship chasing guys for kind of their last hurrah best ball underdog draft stream of the year, and it did not disappoint. It was I was in tears multiple times as the guys in chat said. Leone went out and got his 3-mile run in during the stream and was on the stream running. It was a lot of fun. So make sure you go check that out. So I'm gonna focus on DraftKings to start here. Because I think it will be more evident of kind of like a playoff strategy type thing. Also, I only have 17 more teams to draft into their $5 Millie Maker. There you go. That's not a bad idea. Paul says maybe a Friday 5K with you and Rob. That'll be the next draft club with a twist. We'll be running. That sounds terrible. I don't know if Rob's in good enough shape for that, but I certainly am not. So that would be really bad. That would probably be worse than I think I would rather eat the hot wings again. So we're going to look, if you would like to look at Underdog, we can of course look at that. Actually, we might look at some of the like early tournaments on Underdog, and we can glance a little bit just for fun later at like before the schedule even came out, that the big board and those tournaments, and take a look and see what we luck boxed in the playoffs. But I think I want to look at DraftKings because the playoffs, particularly week 16 and week 17, and particularly week 17, are obviously important in every tournament. And they're obviously extremely important. The reason the whole conversation about the playoffs has come about so much, and again, particularly week 17, is that we have mainly 2 tournaments, Best Ball Mania 3 and this Millie Maker here on DraftKings, that are so big with so many entrants and so many people making the final round, that once you continue to grow that size, both in the fact that there's almost 1 million entrants in this Millie Maker that we're looking at here, and the fact that there's almost 1,000 people in the final round, how do you go about beating the 1,000 other best teams out of 1 million? Right? So the top 1% of teams get there to this, not the top 1%, the top, less than 1%, 0.1%, get to this final round. I guess there's like 800 something thousand. So, whatever. It's a little more than that, but let's just call it 0.1% of teams make it to this final round. They're all really good. You got to beat 1,000 of them. What can you do when you get there to, like, would you show up? Would you like to make $200? Or I think it's $250. of course, everyone is not like upset truly at turning $5 into $250. But when you have a chance to win $1 million and the floor is 250, I would like to get as close to that $1 million as possible. So what are the things that we can do to reach that point? Well, it's building within our teams both the types of players that are going to be better in week 17 and the combinations of players that fit together so that when the thing goes right for me, I can shoot past all these other players, all these other teams in week 17. Rob is on a roof in Boston, so a 5K would be interesting. That would be interesting. If you could 5K it around the roof, that would be good. That would be impressive. So we've done 133 teams here. I've done 133 teams here on DraftKings into the $5 Millie Maker. Here is just the general overview of my exposure. And more importantly for this show, here is what you're looking at for my playoff stacks. And there's a couple things. First, some important, not caveats, some important assumptions to build into this data. One, I don't personally draft for week 16 or week 15 at all. So any of the data that you see there is strictly kind of randomness. Now, it's obviously going to be partially random from the week 7. I am prioritizing week 17. As you see that Denver, KC, Arizona, Atlanta, etc. Those correlations, like those are all those week 17 stacks. Like this is pretty much what I would expect to see in terms of all my different correlations. San Fran, Vegas is probably a little bit low, but has to do quite a bit with the Raiders. But that's about what I would expect to see because I am absolutely prioritizing week 17. In turn, I'm not prioritizing at all. I don't know who plays in week 16 other than the fact that it's, on the screen here for me. I don't look at week 16. I don't have, it's a personal preference that I'm only, particularly in this particular tournament. There would be other tournaments that I would consider it, but in this particular tournament, I'm just not even considering it. And I am just letting whatever happens in week 16 happen. So week 16 and week 15, this data that you're seeing here, like it's actually kind of funny, right? I draft so much of the Cardinals and the Broncos because I'm trying to target these two games that in turn in week 15, I have 55% of my teams have Cardinals, Broncos correlations from within them. And so I wanted to bring this up because people will talk about like, don't just draft the best players. Don't look at week 17 or whatever, or, week 17 doesn't matter. Why are you even thinking about it? Why is it a tiebreaker? Whatever. But the thing is, even when you're not, look at week 16. I'm not trying to do anything with week 16. I'm not trying to do anything with week 15. And through sheer randomness, I'm getting 41% of my teams have at least one Bill and one Bear in them. Complete randomness. Right? Tony, winner of last year's DraftKings Millie Maker Best Ball tournament, has this Detroit and New York Jets game at 6. He has 60% of his teams have that. I feel like I know him well enough to know that he's not specifically targeting it for the week 15 matchup. He's targeting it for, a multitude of reasons. The teams, their playoff schedules, their week 17 games, etc. It's a bunch of different factors, right? But you are going to naturally get quite a bit of playoff correlation through sheer randomness. So when we talk about drafting for week 17 or drafting for the playoffs, the reason you have to really ratchet up that exposure that you're actively trying to get is because everyone is getting it no matter what they do. right? Like you see, like look at all these. I don't draft a ton of Jags and Jets, and I have 28% of my teams have this week 17, or excuse me, week 16 correlation. I don't draft, I guess I do draft a decent amount of Giants. I don't draft that much Vikings. I don't draft that much Washington, whatever, football team. I don't draft a ton of Seahawks, but I still have 13% Chiefs and Seahawks, right? I actually don't draft that much Texans, but I have 32% of their week 15 matchup, as you see here. And you can see the different combinations that I have. RIP to 4 of the teams with John Mechie. But you're going to naturally get correlation in these playoff weeks. And so if you want to pull that lever, right, I want that lever to be something I'm taking advantage of better than the field. I have to actively seek it out and factor it into my drafts, because everybody's going to get some, you're just going to have like 20% or 15 or whatever percent of all these different correlations regardless. So how do you turn it into an edge for you? Is by making sure it happens, at a higher clip with the teams that you want to draft. Josh says, I'm flatter across the board. My highest is Arizona and Denver, 37% week 15. I'm glad you brought that up, because I do expect that I'm higher than most people, because maybe not higher than Tony, who takes pretty big stands, but I am taking big stands in this specific tournament. I'm okay taking big stands, generally speaking. But I have, as you see here, I have a bunch, like I have a fairly condensed core, actually. I don't have anybody, I didn't do the Tony or the Liam thing where they took 70% of individual players or whatever. But I did, my 2 highest owned players are Kyler and Hollywood, right? So I obviously have a lot of Kyler Hollywood stacks. You see Gabe, etc. You see a lot of got 30%, right? That's 10 guys over 30%, a bunch of guys in the 20s, so I have a pretty tight core. There's a lot of guys I'm not taking, you know what I mean? There's guys, shoot, here's a notable name just signed. I have two Deontay Johnson teams total, 2 Dalton Schultz teams total. I'm like Derek Carr 2. I'm Justin Herbert 1. I'm taking pretty big stands. I'm not like, being a diversification bro. So that in turn, because I'm taking those big stands, I'm naturally going to have higher exposure to some of these games, right? So let's talk about some of the week 17, like little nuance. What didn't know Harrison Bryant was in the player pool. Yeah, I'm not sure if you're aware, Austin Hooper's not there anymore. They like to throw to the tight end. I'm sprinkling in a little bit of when you got that beautiful Terry McLaurin team, it's time for your tight end 3 to be Harrison Bryant, no matter how much you hate it. 70% Zach Wilson. That's a lot of Zach Wilson. I respect it. So one thing that I've been actively seeking out as it pertains to week 17 is kind of what you see here. These top couple of games, it's kind of funny. I'm jumping down to the third one here, but Buffalo and Cincinnati is actually not one that I'm like making a super big priority to have as, like core stacks. Like I'm not doing a bunch of, I hardly ever draft Josh Allen, period, but definitely on DraftKings in the second round or whatever. This is just like a ton of these like secondary correlations. Obviously, Gabe Davis is a big part of my portfolio. So what that then, the Bengals, I'm like okay with, right? You see, I do draft a good clip of Chris Evans. I draft a decent amount of T. Higgins. Then you see my guy Isaiah McKenzie here, right? Hayden Hurst. Why do a lot of these picks happen? It's because I've already drafted Gabe Davis, or I already drafted T. Higgins, right? Or I took Jamar Chase. So, okay, now let's take Isaiah McKenzie instead of whoever, Diggs and Hurst, right? Doing those. I don't have much of, the quarterbacks in big stacks. You see, like, almost none of these stacks are like really big. Here's, I guess, Josh Allen, Gabe Davis, Stephon Diggs with the Hayden Hurst bring back. But I'm not really truly going out of my way. I'm trying to find even like a if there is even a Josh Allen. Here's a Burrow, Higgins, Gabe, two Burrow, Higgins, Gabe Davis teams, but there's not a lot of the superstars all combined together on these two teams. However, they're two offenses that are really good and really exciting. And obviously, Gabe Davis is a big part of my portfolio. Stephon Diggs is a fairly big part of my portfolio. Here's a funny one that you get to Josh Allen to Dawson Knox and Gabe Davis with Chris Evans and Hayden Hurst. I don't really take Joe Mixon, so I probably have a lot of those ancillary guys, but that's where you start to see, okay, is that what I want, right? I was saying that I don't want a lot of those, souped up Buffalo and Cincy stacks. But I also want to let's look at T. Higgins, because he's the example. When we scrolled through all of there really wasn't a lot of T with, Bills guys. But then you look at T. Higgins and you see, obviously over here, 58%. So 11 of my 19 T. Higgins teams have Gabe Davis. And so you see 74% of my T. Higgins teams have some form of correlation between Buffalo and Cincinnati. Obviously, the Gabe T is the biggest one. Interestingly, Gabe T plus Chris Evans is actually the second one. Then you see Chris Evans. You see Chris Evans and Gabe. You see Siri is repeating what I'm saying to me in my ears. A little bit of James Cook, right? It's spread out amongst kind of all the guys in that game. One thing you don't really see is T. Actually, we can look at that really quick. You don't see T and Chase. I actually don't know how much T and Chase I have, so you're going to find out just when I do. 0. No T and Chase, which is kind of what I want. I don't want to take Jamar Chase in the top 5 and take his teammate wide receiver, at the 2-3 turn. So that's kind of what you would expect. You can look at Tyler Boyd and then start to get a sense. Well, I don't have any T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd either. What about T? I want just T and Burrow. Only have 3 T Burrow stacks, and you actually see one of them doesn't have a bill. One of them doesn't have a bill on here. This is pulling in some extra. It's pulling in every Joe Burrow team and every as you see, every T and every Burrow team. But only 2 of the Burrow T teams have a Buffalo bring back, right? And so these are just little things. Like, you can't keep track of all this. But as I start to plan out how I want to attack the rest of the draft season, right, I have made the commitment to week 17, and I want to look into these playoff exposures and see if there are any gaps. That's the easiest thing for me to rectify, is those kind of gaps in when I go look at I have made a priority on week 17. Let's dive into those week 17 games and see what the hell's going on from within there, right? Josh said something that was really good, because CJ asked, where do we rank KJ Hamler? We'll get to that game in just a second. But just realized I have 3. Josh just realized he had 3 Kelsey Hamler teams. And it's like, that's amazing. Well, let's look. I'm terrified because I don't know that I have Kelsey Hamler. I don't have a lot of Hamler on DraftKings. Okay, I also have 3 Kelsey Hamler teams. And here's a funny nuance, right? Why is there 100% Mike Williams on Kelsey Hamler teams? I don't know. Variance. 67% Rashad Bateman, David Bell, Alec Pierce. All of them are 2, 6, 10, 2 teams. They're all hero running back teams. There's a fun one. All my Kelsey Hamler teams are all hero running back. I guess, and 2 of them are Swift, and who's the other hero running back? ETN? Is ETN? Yeah, looks like ETN, I guess. Scrolling really quick just to try to... No, Saquon. So Saquon and Swift. The ETN was probably before his ADP rose. But anyway, that's not the Week 17 thing we were getting to here. Obviously, that's 100% of Denver and KC stacks. But it's a good example of, okay, I have, as we see over here, 51% Denver KC teams. I mean, 68 of my teams have some combination of Denver and Kansas City on them. 3 of those are Travis Kelce with KJ Hamler, right? Let's just look at Hamler, because I actually don't know how much. Here's another. It almost triggers me because every time I type some of these guys into here, I don't know how much I have. And like, I'm obviously hoping for a good clip of, okay, 11% Hamler. I'm okay with 11. I was worried that it was going to say like 4% or something, and I was going to be so mad. So 11% Hamler, right? Here's super interesting. Why do they all have Kenny Gainwell? I have no idea. You see, of the Hamler teams, 11 of them are correlated, which also makes intuitive sense with the fact that he was, and it still is, generally speaking, cheap. And so you see, MVS is one of my highest exposure players. And then Javonte is one of my highest exposure players. So I have Hamler with MVS 4 times. I have Hamler with Javonte and MVS 3 times. A little bit of Kelce, right? A Russ Hamler stack with MVS. That's pretty fun. Twice. So he's the guy that's getting, bolted on to the expensive players. There's no, I am kind of curious, is there like Hamler? Wonder if I did a backdoor Hamler Dolchich team or anything like that. Let's take a look. Easier way to do this would just be this. I'm guessing no. I'm guessing there's 0 of these. Oh, look at that. One Hamler Dolchich backdoor stack, which is has Colts Giants in Week 17, is also a hero RB team and an elite quarterback team, because of course it has Kyler to Hollywood, because all my fucking teams have Kyler to Hollywood. But again, just kind of I like just going through this kind of experiment research, right? We look at Denver and Kansas City. It is a priority for me. This game specifically, let me actually close this. We went through the Buffalo and the Cincy thing. And like I said, players from both of those teams are priorities to me, but like, I'm not going out of my way quite as much with those 2 guys. Those 2 teams. I am going out of my way, as you saw. I mean, my 2 highest owned players are Kyler and Hollywood. Kyle Pitts is one of my highest owned players. I'm going out of my way for that game. And I'm going out of my way for, it just so happens that the Broncos and Chiefs play in Week 17, which is making me elevate this number up to 51%. But those 2 teams, from a non-Week 17 perspective, are the guys that I'm like really prioritizing. They're the 2 offenses that I think have just the most potential to be, kind of the most underpriced guys in drafts or whatever. Everybody, pick one. All the way down to Dolchich and Hamler and Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon, from Kelce, Javonte, etc., all the way down to those guys. Both teams have so many guys that I think I want to just have at least my requisite level of exposure to. So that leads to this Week 17 data, right? I'm going to have 50% of my teams with with these combinations. I'm going to have 48% of my teams with these combinations when I'm taking 40% of Kyler Murray and 40% of Hollywood Brown. So, yeah, CJ says starting to get Hollywood in the 50s on DK. He did just get activated. So it's also really funny with DraftKings because he was out, right? He was out. So he's got the big O tag next to his name on DraftKings, and those dudes do just fall. It's pretty crazy. Those dudes fall in drafts, even though that out tag literally means nothing. So he went from the 3-4 turn down into the 50s, which kind of sucks because my average ADP is probably not very good on him. However, I'm getting more. He's becoming even more of a stand unintentionally because he's falling. Tony says, is Hollywood going to be suspended? No, it was just a speeding ticket. It was a whatever they call it, reckless speeding or whatever. Just as Erik says here, thank you for just criminal speeding. Yeah, which is just a different classification of speeding. At least he's going fast compared to all the like checkdowns and stuff he was catching with Tyler Huntley last year. He turned to dust there with Tyler Huntley. So we're back to speedy Hollywood. So when I start to look into my week 17 exposure, I kind of start with, it's a little different for me, right? Maybe than it is for everybody, because like Josh said, like, oh, I don't have these crazy big numbers like I do. And I'm trying to like really hone in on a handful of games. And again, it's not because I'm like, oh, that is the week 17 game that I think is going to blow up. That's the misnomer about the week 17 thing. It's actually just a kind of a combination of a bunch of different things. Like the Denver KC thing isn't really about the fact that they play in week 17. It's a big boost based on how I'm putting together my strategy, because I'm already targeting the shit out of both of these two teams. Both teams have some of my highest exposure players and would, regardless of week 17. They get a little extra boost because they play in week 17, like in my projections, in my rankings. And so that naturally leads to this 51% number, because I'm already higher on them just at a straight normal rankings and projection process than the market is. And then you compound the fact that they play in week 17. And that's kind of how we get to some of these. I'm really hot. Kyler is my QB2 when he goes, it's like the QB6 or whatever. So Hollywood, I have over his ADP, regardless of this game. Kyle Pitts the same way. So it kind of becomes this stacking almost of, no pun intended, this stacking of strategies together, where those guys were the right picks for me, and now they happen to play in the week 17 games. And this tournament specifically is so heavy week 17, 1,000 people, this field is so big that I am trying to pull that week 17 lever more than I would necessarily, even in like we can just look at it. We'll look at it after this, but you'll see the difference. Actually, we're going to do this. Josh asked, because it's a perfect timing and a great point. Josh asked, I wonder what this looks like for someone that's not intentionally correlating, right? So I'm heavily focused on week 17. And so I'm getting these big numbers on the teams and games I'm really jamming correlations into, right? I have a much higher number, 51%, Denver KC, than the field is going to, right? So this is not quite the exact same thing, but let's move over to Underdog and let's pull up one of the big board. Let's go to the big board on Underdog. Okay, that just updated. So now let's flip over to exposure. Here's my big board ownership, right? So for those not familiar, the big board on Underdog was a pre-NFL draft best ball tournament. And my exposure on players is absolutely hilarious in this. I don't. Oh, look at that. We ran hot on KJ Hamler. So that's good, at least. We did not run so hot on Keyshawn Vaughn. Ran pretty hot on Cortland Sutton. The Broncos were a target. So that's good. Trey Lance, Kyron Williams. Whoops. Calvin Ridley. Whoops. But anyway, you kind of see that. So to Josh's point, though, we didn't have the schedule when this tournament. I mean, the NFL draft hadn't even happened. We didn't have the schedule. We didn't have rookie landing spots. We didn't have any of that. So naturally, the exposure to these teams is going to be random and obviously driven by the fact, I did take big stands. So my Tampa Bay, my Philly, these, Denver, some of these, week 17 numbers are going to be driven by that. But you see, even though I was on Denver, Hamler's one of my highest owned players, and Sutton is one of my highest owned players. Oh my God, look at this. 3 friggin' Justin Ross, KJ Hamler teams. That's my highest exposure stack. KJ Hamler, Jerick McKinnon, more Justin Ross. What the fuck was I taking? Which one of you slapdicks convinced me to take Justin Ross? 6 teams. Unbelievable. What are we doing? What are you doing, moron? Big yikes. I'm off my game now. 6 of 48 Justin Ross teams. What the fuck, man? I literally have been like preaching to anyone. People were trying to argue for him and stuff in the chat, like, oh, he just needs to be healthy. I'm like, yeah, but he's not fucking healthy. And I was the dumbass that was drafting him before the draft. This is true. Thank you. You're making me feel better. Other Erik said they were 20 rounds, to be fair, and it was before the NFL draft. He was projected to go earlier in that. Yeah, anti Justin Ross guy has all the pre-draft Ross. Tells you a lot about the cycle, right, of our thinking and our process and player targets and all that. I mean, fuck, look at this. Keyshawn Vaughn, 45%, right? Never would have even thought about that. I Trubisky was a part of I expected that one. Goddard, same way. But McLaurin, I don't really like Terry McLaurin that much. Corey Davis, why? Definitely Kylan Granson, Trey McBride. I get it. Good old Jarrett Patterson. We swung and missed on a lot of these. Yeah, wow. Justin Ross really threw me off. But this is going to Josh's kind of question and point. Obviously, like I said, this is why is the Carolina and Tampa Bay number high? Well, if you're high on Keyshawn Vaughn and you're also high maybe on Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, whatever, you're going to get a fairly high exposure. But generally speaking, right, we're a random sampling, because I couldn't plan for it, a random sampling of week 17 correlations, you're still getting, 25% or whatever. I have five games in week 17 with 26% or more exposure to stacks of that game. And those drafts happened before the schedule came out. So it wasn't like I could have planned for them, right? I mean, Denver and the Rams, obviously both of those teams are teams that I would be interested in drafting. In week 16, I have 47% of that in the big board. Mostly, as you see here, Akers and Sutton and freaking Kyron Williams. You could not draft worse teams apparently in the big board, I think, than I did. But to prove the point, you're kind of seeing a little bit of that random sampling that will happen no matter what. Tony says he has 75 stacks of Baltimore and Pittsburgh week 17. Yeah, it's because you draft Najee in every single draft. We are not surprised to hear that. All right, let me go back, pivot back over to DraftKings and to the Millie Maker. All right, let's go over to our exposures. And I wanted to look at 2 things kind of to wrap up. going through kind of my priority targets, the Denver KC thing, and seeing where there might be some gaps. Same thing with Arizona and Atlanta, as you see, obviously over here, Kyler Hollywood are my two highest owned players, and thus I do want to see, like, in these last, I have 17 drafts left in this tournament, right? What do I need to rectify from my main week 17 priorities in those final 17 teams? And then we can also kind of look at maybe some of the stuff that, Tony says he has 75 teams with Pittsburgh and Baltimore. I have 12 out of 133. And it's kind of what I would expect. Dobbins and Claypool, Pickens and Lamar, Pickens and Bateman, 2 Najee and Bateman. It's mostly Dobbins, Pickens, which is about pretty much what I expect. Little Claypool. So when we look at, there's 68 total Denver KC combinations. And this is, I say this too much now. I said this last week. I'll probably say it next week. The thing that people miss the most when going through their best ball teams is they just look at this number over here, right? I have 36% Trey Lance. Let's use one of the Denver KC guys, actually. I have 32% MVS. So I look at, 32%. That's four times, what the field has, right? If he's drafted in every draft, he's at 8.3%, and I have 32. Like, whoa, buddy, that's probably, too much to some people. To some people, maybe it's not enough. But to most people are probably like, dang, I got my fair share already of MVS. But when you then dig in, right, you'll look here and you'll say, let's actually look at the MVS teams just for the point of this. Marquez, Valdez, Scantling. So you obviously see got the 43 teams of MVS. And then I'm like, okay, I want a lot of MVS and I want a lot of this game. So 23% of my MVS teams don't have. That's the first thing. 23% of my MVS teams don't have a Broncos bring back, which is okay, which is fine. I like the Broncos so much that I do wish that number was higher, but that's okay. But then when you look, you say, okay, I feel good about the MVS number. I feel good about 77% stacks of this game. When you then look and you're like, well, let's scroll down to the bottom first, actually, and see. It still has, God damn it, it still has all of let's do over here. Search for team. It's pulling back all of my stacks. So let's do Denver. Yeah, there we go. If you type in Denver, and Jake's asking, what contest is this? This is the $5 Millie Maker on DraftKings. And I wanted to go through this one because, as you see up here, I've got 133 teams in it. So I'm close to done with this one, which helps. You can get a real full picture of what the portfolio looks like when you're about to the max. And then you can start to see what does your actual portfolio look like around those week 17, week 16 playoff games when you've drafted 150, right? Because people just say, oh yeah, I got 30% of that guy, I got X percent of this guy. So I'm good. I'm covered. But when you actually dig in and you say, okay, look, so these are my MVS teams. I have 43 of them. 16 of my MVS teams have Jerry Jeudy, right? So I typed in Denver. You're going to get a little bit of the guys that have DEN in their name. But who do I have MVS with on the Denver side, actually? Jeudy, Russ. So 37% Jeudy, 26% Russ, 23% Javonte, 21% Sutton, 12% Tim Patrick, RIP to those teams, 12% KJ Hamler, 12% Alberto, 12% Melvin Gordon, 5% Greg Dulcich. So actually, this is one of those where I feel pretty good. Maybe a little heavy on Judy with him, but that's kind of worked, gotten a little lucky, but that has kind of worked out. As you guys know, I'm high on Russ. I'm high on Javonte. The Sutton number at 21% seems fine. 9 Sutton MVS teams seems fine. 5 Alberto. So maybe if you shifted a couple from Judy to Hamler and Alberto, I would be feeling really good. But you look at this and you're like, I'm pretty cool with that distribution of the Broncos guys with MVS, right? And so you just work your way down in these week 17 stacks. It's like, okay, well, now what about Russ? You're like, if that game is a priority and the Broncos are a priority to me, you see here I have 24 Russ teams. So I have 18%. I have 18% Russ. Now, with Russ, what kind of KC teams do I have? Okay, now it gets interesting because it's not quite as flat. It's very heavy MVS when I have the bring back with Russ, right? So 79% of my Russ teams have a KC bring back. So that's good. As we kind of talked about before, it's pretty good. But with him, it's pretty heavy towards MVS. Not saying I want more Hardman, but there's 1 Hardman and 11 MVS. There's actually the real problem is Sky. I think if I get some more Russ teams here in these last 17 teams, I probably want to move some more of this to Sky. Get a few more Sky teams. Let's say I draft 3 more Russ teams. I'm just bullshitting a number, right? If I have 24 or I have 18%, close enough. I'm taking 3 more Russ teams in my final 17. I probably want to keep in my mind or, write in some notes or whatever that Sky is probably the guy I want to pair with him as opposed to MVS, because just through sheer natural drafting, I've ended up really heavily exposed to MVS as my Russ bring back. And there's there's a reason that MVS is higher as a percentage here, but there's no real particular reason that it should be like 50% MVS with Russ and 8% Sky. That I would want to bring that a little bit closer together. So there's a good example of kind of how I want to go through those week 17 games. I mentioned looking at the Cardinals. So we look at Kyler. Obviously, Kyler is going to drive a lot of stacks of that game. First, you see right off the bat, when I punch in Kyler, you see, interestingly, 71% of Kyler teams have a Falcons bring back. Probably not quite as high as I would want, but the problem is, I'm sure everybody has experienced this to some degree, that the Falcons outside of Kyle Pitts, maybe outside of Drake London, are a little bit of a tricky proposition. And so I think that's largely what's leading to this number here. But you see out of 48 teams with Kyler, there's 18 of them have Kyle Pitts. We punch in Atlanta and we see it's pretty heavy Kyle Pitts, which kind of on the inverse of what we talked about with Kansas City and Denver. I'm comfortable with that. Honestly, I would probably prefer it was higher. Let's just remove the Bryan Edwards teams and add them onto Kyle Pitts, and I think I would actually be pretty cool with that. If I add Hollywood onto here, then see what my Atlanta teams look like. You see 21 of my 30. So I've drafted 30 Kyler and Hollywood teams out of 133. Again, it's about in line. That's pretty good to get the bring back on when 71% of my Kyler teams have a bring back and 70% of my Kyler Hollywood teams have a bring back. That's pretty good. And again, it's really Kyle Pitts focused. A little bit of London, a little bit of CPAT, a little bit of Algier, which is again similar to kind of what I would expect. So I actually feel pretty good about that. What you do kind of see then, so my highest exposure players, these two, my highest exposure stack and the bringbacks seem reasonable. My dog is like zonked. I wasn't sure if he was like standing like this, but you see then kind of you can just keep digging into all these different combinations. It's kind of crazy, also a little bit mind numbing when you start to go through it. But so we're looking at my Kyler and Hollywood teams. We saw what the Atlanta portions of them look like, but I can also see, okay, I had what was it? 51% Denver KC. I'm a little lighter on the Denver KC teams with my highest owned stack, right? So there's another thing to think about. Okay, when I take Russ, there's something I've learned. When I take Russ in these final drafts, maybe I want to prioritize Sky a little bit more from the Chiefs side. And if I take any more Kyler Hollywood, maybe I want to, if I want the Denver KC game to be kind of at the same exposure percentage as it is, across my entire portfolio, I need to think about Denver KC secondary stacks with that. Part of that problem, why this is a little bit lower number, I'm sure, is that, so Travis Kelce, if you take Travis Kelce in the first, you're probably not taking, I'm not saying you can't, but generally you're probably not taking Kyle Pitts in the third. And then Hollywood goes in the fourth, fifth, and Kyler goes in the fifth, sixth, right? Juju goes in the same fourth, fifth. A lot of the guys go in the same ranges. Javonte goes in the third, which is where you're thinking about Pitts, right? There's a lot of crossing, a lot of overlap. So then when I click into here, it's like, okay, you see, okay, 3 with Kyler and Hollywood. 3 of them are Javonte and MVS. Makes sense. Interestingly, Travis Kelce and Melvin Gordon. Javonte and Travis Kelce. So that's good. I've been wanting to make sure I have enough Javonte and Travis Kelce. But you see the point. You start to keep going down this, rabbit hole of figuring out exactly where you want your exposures to be through all these different playoff combinations. And you're never going to get them to precisely where you want them to be, honestly. But because it's a snake draft. It's not an auction. You don't get to pick and choose necessarily exactly who you get in every single draft. But you can start playing through all these different combinations. And that's really the main thing that I'm trying to do here. I kind of mentioned in Discord the other day that I'm definitely, drafting right now, but I'm not going like super duper crazy. I'm going to go super duper crazy at the end. Kind of barbelling for everyone that, loves the catchphrases, the keywords, barbelling my drafts. And so I'm in a little bit of this research zone right now where I'm trying to figure out, like I said, with 17 more teams, what are the little things that I want to go through? And I think from a playoff perspective is the easiest way to really hone in, because you can really see like, okay, out of 133 teams, you love Russ, you are big on the Chiefs, you like Sky Moore, you only got 2 of those. So, you start to dig it, start at that top of, okay, all these guys are my priorities. Or even if it's not a certain individual player that's your priority, it's maybe I'm a 0 RB bro, or I'm a robust RB bro, or I'm an anchor running back, hero running back guy. Let's start looking through all my hero running backs and be like, okay, let's look at what Colts I have with Saquon. Let's look at what Ravens I have with Najee. Let's look at what Giants I have with JT, etc., and start running down that list and just kind of continually improving upon drafts as you work your way through, whether you're doing 150, if you're doing 10, if you're doing 10 and you say, look, in these 10, I want to have this many Kyler teams and this many Russ teams or whatever, being able to see what you have in those, like I'm going to do 10 Best Ball Mania teams and I want to have Kyler on all of them. Do I want to have Kyle Pitts on all of those also? Do I want to have Bryan Edwards? Do I not care about the bring back, right? And I want to start investigating those. So I'm going to be back this afternoon. Thank you guys for dealing with me on the reschedule of this DraftIQ show. We will be back next Wednesday with this at the regularly scheduled time, 5 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. We'll keep digging into some of these portfolio exposure, all that as draft season starts to wind down. Be back today at 5 p.m. Eastern with the normally scheduled Best Ball Theory show. And I'm bringing on a special guest, Matthew Betts. I believe he's at the Fantasy PT on Twitter. He works for the Fantasy Footballers, and he is, a medical expert. We're going to learn about the strategy around injuries and, recovery times and how to handle some of these training camp injuries and the reports and the uncertainty. When should we draft the hurt guys? When should we fade the, guys coming back from a serious injury? We're going to talk through all that this afternoon, like I said, at 5 p.m. Eastern. So I'll be back with you guys then. Appreciate you, and I'll talk to you guys this afternoon. Peace.